Close your eyes. Let's go back in time 6,000 years, then 7,000 years, then 8,000 years. You are standing in Eridu, the oldest city the Sumerians knew. They could not remember who built it. In your hands, a clay tablet, not a creation story. And after, the Sumerian King List opens with impossible words. After kingship descended from heaven. Not created, descended. Power fell from somewhere else into a world already waiting. This is not how the Anunnaki created civilization. This is what existed before. Before gods ruled cities. Before anyone could explain where authority came from. The oldest written words do not describe a beginning. They describe an inheritance. Tonight, we follow that inheritance backward. Into flood layers. Into unnamed forces. Into a world the Sumerians remembered as already ancient when writing began. You will see why the Anunnaki may be less about ancient aliens and more about a civilization so ancient even the ancients could not remember who built it. Before we go further, like and subscribe if drawn to history sleeping between forgotten foundations. Tell me where you listen from. Your support means everything. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Language of After. The story begins not with creation, but with after. After kingship descended from heaven. After cities already stood. After agriculture already fed thousands. After floodwaters had already erased something no one could name. This single word, after, changes everything. The Sumerian King List is one of the most extraordinary documents to survive from the ancient world. Preserved on clay tablets excavated from Nippur, Lhasa, and Isin, it attempts to record every ruler who ever held power in Mesopotamia, stretching back into what the scribes themselves called before the flood. But it does not open the way creation myths typically open. Picture a scribe in Nippur, 2,600 years before our era. The temple complex rises around him, mud brick walls thick enough to hold back floods and armies. He has been commissioned to create an official record, something that will establish legitimacy, connect current kings to the deep past, prove continuity of power. His stylus is cut reed. His tablet is soft clay. He presses wedge-shaped marks into the surface, building cuneiform signs from simple elements. Triangle, line, angle. The language of heaven and earth, reduced to geometry. He writes the opening line. Not, in the beginning, the gods created kingship. Not when heaven and earth were separated, kingship arose. He writes, Namlugal Anta'ed Abba. After kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu. After, the Sumerian word is clear, unambiguous. There is no translation debate here. The text places the descent of kingship, this cosmic moment when divine authority supposedly enters the human world, in the middle of a sequence. Something came before. The scribe knew it. Every scribe who copied this text across the next 1,000 years knew it. They preserved the word. After. This is not how myths of origin typically function. Origins are supposed to be absolute. The first moment, the beginning point, the creation from nothing, or the emergence from chaos. But the Sumerians opened their most sacred political document with a word that assumes prior events. Why? So here is what we have. The oldest continuous written tradition on Earth, Sumerian cuneiform, uses the language of inheritance at the precise moment we would expect the language of creation. Not the gods made kingship, but kingship descended after. After what? The text does not say, perhaps the scribe did not know, or perhaps everyone knew, and it needed no explanation. The way you do not explain to your neighbors what after the war means if you all lived through it together. But for us, reading 4,000 years later, the gap is profound. To understand how strange the Sumerian framing is, consider how other ancient civilizations describe their origins. The Hebrew Bible opens with Bereshit, in the beginning. God creates heaven and earth from nothing, light from darkness, order from void, the starting gun of existence itself. Nothing precedes this moment, because nothing existed to precede it. The Egyptian creation texts describe Atum, the self-created God, emerging from the primordial waters of none. He is alone, complete, self-sufficient. He speaks, and the world manifests through the power of his utterance. Creation, through divine command. The word becomes reality. No prior world, no prior gods. Just Atum, alone in the void, beginning everything. Greek cosmology, as recorded by Hesiod in the Theogony, begins with chaos, the yawning gap, the primal void. From chaos comes Gaia, the earth, and Aranos, the sky. They couple, they generate, titans emerge. God's war. The cosmos is born through violence and reproduction, but it starts with chaos. The absolute beginning, nothing before. Even the Norse myths begin with Ginnungagap, the yawning abyss, and the first being Ymir, from whose body the world is crafted. Every tradition has its starting point. Its moment zero. Its this is where it all begins. Except the Sumerians. The Sumerian texts open in the middle. They describe organization, not creation. Separation, not generation. The gods do not speak the world into being. They divide what already exists. They assign domains. They establish boundaries. They impose order on a cosmos already present. And when the most important political document opens, it says, after. Scholars have debated this for decades. Samuel Noah Kramer, one of the pioneering Sumerologists of the 20th century, noted that Sumerian cosmology shows a remarkable lack of interest in absolute origins. The texts, he observed, focus on differentiation rather than creation. One interpretation could be that the Sumerians simply had a different philosophical framework. Perhaps they rejected the concept of creation from nothing. Perhaps their worldview was fundamentally about transformation, the emergence of order from potential, the separation of mixed elements into distinct realms. This is a sophisticated philosophical position. It aligns with certain strands of Greek thought, Anaxagoras and his concept of nous, organizing pre-existing matter. It anticipates modern scientific understandings, where the universe emerges from quantum fields, not from nothing. But there is another possibility. One the archaeological evidence increasingly supports. Perhaps the Sumerians used the language of inheritance because they were, in fact, inheritors. The phrase from days of old appears across hundreds of Sumerian texts. Yud, Ul, Vis, O, ancient days, former times, what came before. It is not decorative language. It is structural, foundational. The texts return to it again and again. When Ur-Nammu, king of Ur, rebuilds the great ziggurat in the 21st century BCE, his inscription does not claim innovation. It states, "The temple which from days of old had been built, but whose structure had become old, I rebuilt." He is not creating. He is restoring, following ancient plans, returning something to its proper form. When Gudea of Lagash constructs temples in the 22nd century BCE, he describes his work in similar terms. He is renewing the ancient plans. He is following the designs of former days. He is restoring what had fallen into disrepair. Picture Gudea standing before the foundation of a temple. The mud brick walls have eroded. Centuries of rain and wind and seasonal floods have worn the structure down, but the foundation remains. The platform, the orientation, the basic design. Gudea does not tear it down and start fresh with his own vision. He excavates carefully. He finds the original cornerstones. He measures the ancient dimensions. He rebuilds exactly as it was before. Why? Because the ancient builders knew something, possessed some knowledge, had access to some wisdom that must not be lost. This is not the behavior of a civilization that believes it is the origin point. This is the behavior of a civilization that believes it came late, that something greater existed before, that the task is not to create but to preserve. Even the great epic of Gilgamesh, composed in the early 2nd millennium BCE, frames its hero this way. The opening lines describe Gilgamesh as one who saw the deep, who knew the days before the flood, who brought back a message from the antediluvian age. The hero is defined not by his innovations, but by his recovery of ancient knowledge, by his connection to what came before, by his ability to bridge the gap between the present world and the lost world that preceded it, this pattern repeats across genres: royal inscriptions, temple hymns, mythological texts, legal codes. The Sumerians were obsessed with antiquity, with precedent, with what the ancestors knew and built and understood. They did not see themselves as the beginning of civilization. They saw themselves as its maintainers, its preservers, its inheritors. And that changes everything about how we should read their myths about the gods. So the evidence converges. The language of the King List after kingship descended. The language of royal inscriptions from days of old, restoring what had been built. The language of epic, bringing back knowledge from before the flood. The Sumerians consistently described themselves not as originators, but as inheritors. Not as the first, but as the latest in a sequence they could not fully trace. Which raises the question we opened with, now sharpened to a point. If kingship descended after something already existed, what was that something? After implies a world already functioning, already organized, already inhabited. After implies systems in place, cities standing, agriculture feeding populations. After implies that when the gods descended, when kingship arrived from heaven, they were not creating civilization. They were entering it, organizing it, explaining it. But who built what they organized? The myths do not say. They open with after and move forward. The prior world remains unnamed, unattributed, lost in the gap between the last memory and the first written word. But the gap is visible. The language itself preserves the outline of what is missing, like a shadow cast by something no longer there. Consider what the texts do not claim. They do not say the gods built Eridu. They say kingship was in Eridu after it descended. Eridu already existed. The city predates the divine arrival. They do not say the gods invented agriculture. They say the gods organized labor, assigned fields, distributed rations. Agriculture was already functioning. The gods managed what was already present. They do not say the gods created the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. They say Enki organized the freshwater sources, established their boundaries, assigned their functions. The rivers pre-existed the divine organization. The pattern is consistent. The gods are administrators, not creators. Organizers, not inventors. Managers of systems already in operation when they arrived, which means something, or someone, built those systems before the gods were ever named. The archaeological evidence supports this reading. The cities the myths describe are not mythological constructs. They are real places. And when archaeologists excavate them, they find something remarkable. The occupation layers stretch back far beyond the dates when writing begins, far beyond the dates when the myths were composed. Thousands of years of continuous habitation, gradual development, slow accumulation of complexity. The cities were already ancient when the first scribe pressed the first cuneiform sign into clay. The systems were already functioning when the first myths were written to explain them. And the gods, these divine administrators who descend after to organize the world, are not describing creation. They are describing inheritance. The inheritance of a world built by people whose names the Sumerians themselves could no longer remember. To understand what existed before the gods had names, we must go deeper, into the oldest cosmological texts, into the primordial condition the Sumerians described, before differentiation, before heaven separated from earth, before anything had distinct identity. We must examine what the texts call Namu, not a goddess, not a being who acts, but a state, a condition, the undifferentiated whole from which all things would eventually emerge. And then we must turn to the earth itself, to the cities rising from the desert, to the layers of occupation stacked like pages in a book made of mud, because if the gods organized a world already built, the evidence of that world must still exist, buried, waiting, silent, but there. Chapter 2. The Primordial State and the First Cities. Tonight we take two steps. First, the idea of what existed before gods had names. Then, the evidence in mud brick and strata that humans were already living, building, organizing, from philosophy to archaeology, from concept to clay. In the British Museum, in a basement room where temperature and humidity are carefully controlled, sits a fragment of clay tablet, catalogue number K3445, recovered from the ruins of Ashurbanipal's library in Nineveh, 19th century excavation. Pressed into this fragment are some of the oldest cosmological concepts in human writing. The tablet describes Namu, not a goddess who acts, not a deity who speaks or commands, or shapes. The text gives her no myths of creation, no stories of her forming the world or breathing life into humanity. No temples were built in her honor. No priesthood served her. No prayers asked for her intervention. She appears in the cosmological texts as pure existence, primordial condition, the state before states. The Sumerian word Namu shares a root with Ama, mother. But the theological texts never treat her as a mother goddess in the way later cultures would understand that term. She does not nurture. She does not protect. She does not love or favor or intercede. She simply is. The hymn on tablet K3445 describes Namu as the cosmic sea, not water as we know it, flowing in rivers, crashing in waves. This was something else entirely. A vast, undifferentiated expanse, limitless, dark, containing all possibility, but manifesting as nothing. It was chaos in its purest form, not the messy disorder of a storm, but primordial chaos, the state of pure potential before any organizing principle imposed structure upon reality. Modern scholars examining these texts note that the Sumerian concept represents one of humanity's earliest attempts to grapple with the philosophical problem of origins. Not creation from nothing, the Sumerians rejected that notion, but transformation, differentiation, the emergence of form from formlessness. Namu was that formlessness. Picture it not as an ocean, but as an absolute, a condition where nothing is distinct, because everything is mixed, where heaven and earth are not separated, because the concepts of heaven and earth do not yet exist, where light and darkness are meaningless terms, because there is no differentiation to create contrast. This is what existed, before existence as we understand it, and from this undifferentiated whole, something began to emerge. What the Sumerian cosmology proposes is philosophically radical. Other creation myths describe gods generating the world through speech, through reproduction, through violence. Divine action creates reality. The god precedes the creation and brings it into being through will. But Namu does not act. She is not prior to creation in the sense of existing before and then making. She is the condition from which differentiation occurs. This suggests the Sumerians understood something profound. That existence is not about generation, but about organization. Not about making something from nothing, but about separating the mixed into the distinct. The texts describe the first differentiation as the separation of An and Ki, heaven and earth, sky and ground, above and below. But this is not described as a violent act or a divine command. It simply happens. The way water and oil separate, the way hot air rises and cold air sinks. Natural differentiation, inherent organization. An becomes the dome of heaven, not blue sky filled with clouds, but the dark firmament studded with stars, a solid boundary holding back the cosmic waters above. Ki becomes the foundation, the bedrock of reality, the solid ground upon which all future existence would be built. Together they represent the first great cosmic schism, the primordial separation of the unified void into distinct realms, above and below. Masculine and feminine principle, the creative tension between sky and earth. Some later versions of the myth suggest that An and Ki were originally joined, a single unified mass floating in Namu's waters, and that Enlil, the god of wind and air, forcibly separated them. But the older texts suggest something different. They hint that An and Ki emerged already distinct, that their very existence was predicated on difference, on opposition, on the space between. This is not the language of divine intervention. This is the language of natural process, emergence, differentiation, organization without an organizer. And this raises a question that will echo through everything that follows. If the cosmos organized itself, if heaven and earth separated naturally from the primordial condition, Then what role do the gods actually play? The gods, in Sumerian cosmology, do not create the fundamental structures of reality. They inherit them. An and Ki separate from Namu. Then the gods are born from An and Ki, which means the gods come after the basic structure of the cosmos already exists. They are not the origin. They are products of a process already underway. And if the gods themselves emerge from a cosmos already differentiating, already organizing, already following inherent patterns, then their role is not creation. Their role is maintenance, administration, the assignment of functions to structures that already exist. Enlil does not create the space between heaven and earth. He governs it. Enki does not generate the freshwater sources. He manages them. Inanna does not invent cities. She rules them. The gods organize what is already present. But organization requires something to organize, systems to manage, structures to assign functions to, which brings us to the evidence. The physical proof that something existed before divine mythology could explain it. The cities themselves. If Namu represents the cosmic condition before differentiation, then the cities represent the proof that humans were already living inside that condition, already building, already organizing, long before gods had names to explain them. The philosophy in the texts points to inheritance. Now we turn to the archaeology that proves it. Eridu sits in the southern Iraqi desert, about 12 miles southwest of what was once the ancient city of Ur. Today it is called Tel Abu Sharain, a mound rising from flat land, layers of human occupation compressed into earth. When archaeologists excavated Eridu in the 1940s and 50s, they found something extraordinary. Temples. Built on top of temples. Built on top of temples. 18 distinct building phases. 18 generations. Each one carefully constructing a new temple directly above the ruins of the old one. Same location. Same orientation. Same basic design. The earliest temple, designated Temple 1 by excavators, dates to approximately 5400 BCE, 6th millennium before our era. A simple structure, reed walls, mud plaster, an altar, an offering platform. It burned or collapsed or simply wore away. The next generation rebuilt it. Template 2, slightly larger. Same location. Same east-facing orientation toward the rising sun. Then Temple 3. Then 4. Then 5. Generation after generation. Century after century. Millennium after millennium. By Temple 18, the structure had evolved into a massive mud brick platform, supporting a complex architectural design. But the location never changed. The orientation never shifted. The purpose remained constant. Picture what this means. A community deciding, for thousands of years, that this specific spot is sacred. Not because a god told them in a myth, those myths had not been written yet, but because their ancestors built here, and their ancestors before them, and their ancestors before them. The knowledge of why this location mattered was transmitted not through writing, but through practice, through the act of rebuilding, through the physical continuity of construction. By the time the first cuneiform tablets describe Eridu as sacred to Enki, god of the freshwater deep, the city had already been continuously occupied for more than 2,000 years. The god did not choose the location. The location predated the god. The myth came later to explain why this place, of all places, mattered. The archaeology proves it. Stratigraphy does not lie. The layers stack oldest to youngest, bottom to top. Temple 1 at the base. Temple 18 near the surface. Thousands of years of continuous sacred use. Before writing, before mythology, before anyone could compose a hymn explaining that Enki dwells in the Abzu beneath Eridu. The city was already ancient. The practice was already established. The gods inherited the significance. 100 miles northeast of Eridu lies Uruk, the city that gives its name to an entire archaeological period. Uruk, biblical Erech, was one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. At its height in the late 4th millennium BCE, it may have housed 40,000 people. Monumental architecture, sophisticated administration, the birthplace of writing itself. But Uruk, like Eridu, was not founded by divine decree. It evolved. The White Temple, one of Uruk's most famous structures, sits atop a massive artificial platform called the Anu Ziggurat. Archaeologists excavating the platform discovered that it was not a single construction event. It was built in stages over centuries. Beneath the White Temple lie earlier structures. Beneath those, even earlier ones. The platform itself contains the compacted remains of previous buildings, deliberately filled in and built over to create elevation. This is not the work of a single generation responding to divine command. This is multi-generational engineering, community coordination across centuries, each generation adding to what the previous generation built. The Iana precinct, dedicated to Inanna, goddess of love and war, shows the same pattern. Excavation reveals at least 14 major building phases. Simple shrines evolving into elaborate temple complexes. Gradual sophistication. Accumulated knowledge. At nearby Tel Brak in northern Mesopotamia, archaeologists discovered the Eye Temple, 4th millennium BCE, named for the thousands of small alabaster idols found there, each carved with enormous eyes, but the Eye Temple sits on earlier occupation levels. Beneath it, pottery sequences showing gradual stylistic development, trade goods from hundreds of miles away, administrative clay tokens used for accounting, before writing existed, complexity, organization, long, distance, coordination, all before cuneiform script could document it, all before myths could explain it. The pattern is consistent across southern Mesopotamia. Cities do not appear suddenly, they grow. Settlement becomes village, village becomes town, town becomes city, incrementally. Across millennia, no rupture event, no moment when the gods descended and cities sprang from barren ground, just continuous human habitation, building, rebuilding, expanding, organizing. Here is the crucial timeline. Cities like Eridu show continuous occupation from approximately 7500 BCE onward. Agricultural settlements, then villages, then proto-urban centers, then full cities with monumental architecture and specialized labor. Writing emerges around 3200 BCE. Cuneiform script invented to manage the administrative complexity of urban life. The first tablets are not literature. They are accounts, ration lists, inventory records. Mythological texts, the stories of gods creating order, establishing cities, granting kingship, are not composed until approximately 2600 BCE, 2000 years after Eridu's first temples, 4000 years after initial settlement. The gap is enormous. For 2000 years, cities functioned without written explanations of why they existed. For 4000 years, communities coordinated labor and constructed monumental architecture without literacy. Knowledge was oral, transmitted through practice, encoded in the act of rebuilding temples in the same location, orienting walls to the same celestial events, maintaining irrigation systems according to principles learned from fathers and mothers and grandparents. Then writing begins. And when it expands beyond accounting to include narrative, the scribes face an impossible task. Explain a world older than explanation. Account for cities whose founders are beyond memory. Irrigation systems whose engineers left no names. Social hierarchies whose origins cannot be traced. So they create the gods, divine figures who represent the organizing principles they can observe, but cannot trace to human origin. Enki dwells in Eridu, because Eridu has always been sacred to the water source. But why was it sacred? The scribes do not know. It was sacred before memory. So Enki becomes the answer. The god embodies the function that predates documentation. So we have the paradox complete now. The language says after kingship descended. The archaeology shows before, cities older than the gods who supposedly founded them, systems functioning before myths explained them. Namu represents the philosophical understanding that organization precedes divine action. The cities represent the physical proof that human organization preceded divine mythology. But why the gap between doing and documenting? Why did it take 2000 years for writing to emerge? And why, when it did the explanations take the form of divine intervention rather than human achievement? The answer lies buried in mud. Layers of it. Flood mud. The cities rebuilt. The temples rose again and again on the same foundations. The systems continued. But something happened between the builders and the scribes. Something that severed the thread of memory. That broke the chain of attribution. Something the Sumerians themselves recorded, remembered, feared. The flood. Not a single flood. Not divine punishment. But disruption of continuity, of institutional knowledge, of the ability to remember who built what came before. And when memory fails, mythology fills the gap. The gods do not create what never existed. They explain what already did. We turn now to the rupture, to the moment when everything the ancestors built became inheritance without instruction, function without origin, to the flood that made gods necessary. Chapter 3. The flood as memory rupture. Not divine punishment, not cosmic cleansing, but disruption of continuity, of institutional memory, of the ability to trace origins. The flood the Sumerians remembered was not the end of the world. It was the end of knowing who built it. In 1929, British archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley was excavating the ancient city of Ur. His team had dug down through occupation layers, pottery, ash, mud brick, the compressed residue of human life, stacked like pages in a book. Then they hit something unexpected. Clean clay, sterile, no artifacts, no ash, no pottery shards, no evidence of human activity at all. 8 feet of it. Woolley's workers assumed they had reached virgin soil, the natural earth beneath the city. The excavation was complete, but Woolley ordered them to keep digging. Beneath the 8 feet of sterile clay, they found more occupation layers, earlier pottery styles, different architectural techniques, an older city buried beneath the flood deposit. Woolley called it evidence of the biblical flood. The newspapers ran sensational headlines. Noah's flood found. The discovery became entangled in religious debates and archaeological controversies that persist to this day. But the flood deposit at Ur was not unique. At Shuruppak, ancient Farah, excavators found similar layers. Sterile silt interrupting continuous occupation. At Kish, flood deposits. At Uruk, evidence of water damage in lower strata. Across southern Mesopotamia, the pattern repeated. Not everywhere, not at every site. The deposits were localized, regional, different depths, different dates when subjected to modern analysis. This suggests something important. Not a single world, ending deluge, but multiple flooding events across different periods. Regional catastrophes, the kind that happen when rivers shift course, when seasonal rains exceed normal patterns, when human, modified landscapes fail to contain the water they were designed to manage. Climate researchers studying the period note significant disruptions. Some discuss what is called the 4.2 kiloyear event, a dramatic climate shift around 2200 BCE that brought drought to some regions and flooding to others. This may help frame why flood memories recur across Mesopotamian traditions. Though, correlating specific archaeological layers to specific mythological accounts remains debated among scholars. The deposits tell us flooding happened. They do not tell us which flood became the flood in cultural memory. What the deposits do reveal is disruption, abandoned settlements, rebuilt cities, population displacement, the archaeological signature of catastrophe. The Sumerians did not have one flood myth. They had flood traditions, plural, woven through different texts, different genres, different periods. The Sumerian King List, the document we opened with, contains the most explicit reference. After listing the antediluvian kings, rulers who supposedly reigned for thousands of years each, the text states simply, "Then the flood swept over." After the flood, a new section begins. After the flood had swept over, when kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Kish. Not in Eridu anymore. In Kish, a different city. The center of power has shifted. The genealogies break. The king list essentially restarts. This is not described as divine punishment. There is no moral framework. No statement that humanity sinned, and the gods responded with destruction. The flood simply happened. An event, A rupture in the sequence. The Eridu Genesis, composed sometime in the early 2nd millennium BCE, provides more narrative detail. It describes 5 cities before the flood: Eridu, Badtibira, Larak, Sippar, and Shuruppak. Kingship already established. Civilization already functioning. Then the gods decide to send a flood, not as punishment, but as solution to overpopulation. Humanity has grown too numerous, too noisy. The gods, disturbed in their rest, decide to reduce the population. The god Enki, always portrayed as humanity's advocate, warns Ziusudra, a king of Shuruppak: build a boat, preserve life, survive. Ziusudra obeys. The flood comes. 7 days and 7 nights. When it ends, Ziusudra opens the boat and makes offerings to the gods. The gods, seeing that humanity survived, grant Ziusudra immortality. He is removed to Dilmun, a distant paradise, where he lives forever. The Epic of Gilgamesh, though preserved in later Akkadian versions, incorporates this flood tradition. Gilgamesh, seeking immortality, travels to the edge of the world to find Utnapishtim, the survivor of the flood. The name is Akkadian, but the figure is Ziusudra. Same story, different language. Tablet 11 of the Gilgamesh epic describes the flood in vivid detail. Water rising, the world returning to darkness, the gods themselves terrified by the destruction they unleashed. The goddess Ishtar weeping, saying the olden days have turned to clay. That line is crucial. The olden days have turned to clay, not destroyed entirely, but transformed, made formless, returned to the primordial state. The organized world has become undifferentiated again. Clay, mud, the material from which tablets are made, but also the material from which structure dissolves. When the flood recedes, Utnapishtim emerges. He makes offerings. The gods smell the incense and gather like flies over the sacrifice, a strikingly human image of divine desperation. Enlil, who sent the flood, is furious that someone survived. But Enki defends the choice. Humanity must continue, cannot be erased entirely. Utnapishtim, like Ziusudra before him, is granted immortality and removed from the world of mortals. The pattern is consistent across these accounts. The flood is not the end. It is an interruption, a break in continuity. After it, civilization resumes. But something has been lost. The critical insight is this: the flood, in Sumerian tradition, does not destroy cities permanently. They rebuild. It does not end civilization. It continues. It does not eliminate humanity. Survivors remain. What the flood destroys is something more subtle and more catastrophic in its own way. Memory, documentation, the ability to trace origins, picture the aftermath. Not total annihilation. Archaeological continuity rules that out, but enough disruption to fracture institutional knowledge. Imagine Shuruppak after the waters recede. The city is damaged but not obliterated. The mud brick walls are still standing, though weakened. The temple platform remains, though the upper structure has collapsed. The irrigation canals are visible, though choked with silt. The survivors return. They begin rebuilding. The canals can be cleared. The walls can be repaired. The temple can be reconstructed, but the tablets are gone. Clay dissolves in water. The administrative records that tracked grain storage, land allocation, labor organization dissolved. The technical manuals, if they existed, that explained canal gradients and construction techniques, gone. The genealogies that connected current leaders to founding ancestors, washed away. The infrastructure survives. But the documentation of who built it, why it was built this way, what principles governed its design, that knowledge exists now only in human memory, in the minds of survivors. And human memory is fragile. An engineer who knew the precise angle for canal flow drowns. His apprentice survives, but only half, trained. The canal continues to function because the physical structure remains, but the knowledge of why it angles this way, how to repair it if it breaks, how to extend it to new fields, that knowledge is diminished. A priestess who maintained the temple calendar drowns. Her daughter knows the rituals, but not the astronomical calculations behind them. The calendar continues because the pattern is observable. The sun still rises, the moon still cycles. But the understanding of why these dates were chosen, what celestial events they mark, what deeper significance they hold, that understanding has gaps. 3 generations later, the gaps are chasms. The canal still works, but no one remembers who designed it. It must have been someone wise, someone powerful, someone divine. The temple calendar still functions, but no one remembers the astronomical principles. The gods must have ordained these dates. The gods who understand the heavens. The social hierarchy still exists. Kings still rule. But the genealogies are broken. The connection to founders is lost. Kingship must have descended from heaven, must have divine origin, because the human origin is beyond recovery. This is how catastrophe creates mythology, not by destroying everything, but by destroying the records of how everything was built. Function survives, origin doesn't. The flood creates a gap, not in cities, they rebuild. Not in systems, they continue functioning, but in knowledge, in the ability to say, we built this because, or it works this way because. The how survives, the who and why don't. And into that gap step the gods. There is a pattern that repeats throughout human history. When catastrophe disrupts institutional continuity, mythology fills the void. After the Western Roman Empire falls, medieval Europeans stand before aqueducts and amphitheatres they cannot replicate. The technology has been lost. So they create legends. Giants built these structures, or ancient wizards, or races of superhuman builders from before the flood. After the Mongol invasions devastate Baghdad, the astronomical and mathematical knowledge of the House of Wisdom, centuries of accumulated observation and calculation, largely disappears. What survives becomes attributed to legendary wise men, blessed with divine knowledge. After colonial disruptions sever indigenous knowledge transmission in the Americas, oral traditions that carried agricultural techniques, astronomical observations, medicinal practices across generations are interrupted. What survives often becomes encoded in mythology, sacred stories, divine gifts from culture heroes and gods. The pattern is not unique to Mesopotamia. It is a human response to a universal problem. When you inherit complexity you did not create and cannot fully explain, you attribute it to forces greater than human, to ancestors who were superhuman, to gods who gifted knowledge from beyond. This is not primitive thinking. It is practical preservation. If you do not know who built the canal, but you know the canal is essential, you declare it sacred. You say, a god built it. You create taboos against altering it. You ensure it will be maintained, even though the technical knowledge is lost. The mythology preserves function when documentation fails. The gods remember what humans forgot, not because gods are real in a supernatural sense, but because attributing essential systems to divine origin ensures those systems will be maintained by generations who no longer understand why they work. The Sumerian flood traditions describe exactly this process. Before the flood, cities functioned. Kingship existed. Civilization operated. After the flood, those same cities, that same kingship, that same civilization continues. But the connection is broken. The genealogy is interrupted. The origin is obscured. So the scribes, writing 1,000 years after the events they describe, compose myths that explain the gap. Kingship descended from heaven after the flood. The gods organized the world. Divine wisdom established the systems. Not because this is literally true, but because this is how post-catastrophe societies encode pre-catastrophe knowledge when the chain of transmission has been severed. And so we arrive at the gods themselves. These divine administrators who appear in the texts not as creators, but as organizers, not as originators, but as inheritors. The Anunnaki, the princely offspring, those who descended from heaven to manage a world already built. Who were they? What role did they play? And why does understanding them as administrators rather than creators change everything about how we read Sumerian religion? We turn now to the divine bureaucracy, to the assembly of gods who assign domains, distribute responsibilities, and manage the cosmic order, not because they created it, but because someone had to organize what the flood survivors could no longer explain. Chapter 4. The Divine Bureaucracy, Gods as Administrators. The Anunnaki, princely offspring. Divine administrators, not creators. Organizers of a world already functioning. Understanding them this way changes everything. In the Sumerian language, words carry layers of meaning. Etymology is not decoration. It is instruction. Anunnaki. Sometimes written as Anuna. Sometimes as Anuna. The variations appear across different periods, different cities, different scribal traditions, but the core elements remain consistent. An, the supreme sky god, whose name means heaven itself. Nuna, a term carrying connotations of nobility, princely status, seed, offspring. Ki, earth, ground, foundation. Put together, the princely offspring of heaven and earth, or more literally, those of royal blood who connect the cosmic realms. This immediately tells us something crucial. The Anunnaki are not generic divine beings. They are specifically the children, the lineage, the royal family of the supreme god An. They are divine aristocracy, beings of privilege and power who trace their ancestry directly back to the source of cosmic order. But here is what matters most. They are described as offspring, as descendants, as coming after, not the origin, not the beginning, but the next generation. The texts preserved at Eridu, Nippur, and Uruk provide genealogies, divine family trees mapping the emergence of the gods from the primordial condition we examined in the previous chapter. From Namu, the undifferentiated cosmic sea, came An and Ki, heaven and earth. The first separation. From An and Ki came the Anunnaki, the children of that separation, the beings who would administer the differentiated cosmos. Notice the sequence. First, the primordial state. Then, the basic structure of reality. Then, the gods who will organize that structure. The gods do not precede the cosmos. They emerge from it. And if they emerge from a cosmos already structured into heaven and earth, already following patterns of separation and differentiation, then their role is not creation. Their role is assignment, distribution, administration. The texts are explicit about this. Enlil. The name means Lord Air or Lord Wind. His domain is the space between heaven and earth, the atmosphere, the breath, the gap. In the cosmological texts, Enlil is described as the one who completed the separation of An and Ki. His parents were joined, heaven pressed against earth, and Enlil emerged into the space between them, forcing them apart, creating the atmosphere in which life could exist. But notice what this means. Heaven and earth already existed. An and Ki were already present. Enlil does not create them. He separates them, completes the differentiation. His role is executive. He enforces cosmic law, maintains boundaries, ensures the separated realms remain distinct. The Sumerian hymns describe Enlil as the one who fixes destinies. But destinies, in this context, does not mean predetermining individual fates. It means assigning functions, designating roles, establishing the order by which the cosmos operates. Enlil decrees that the sun will rise and set, that the seasons will cycle, that the rivers will flow, not because he creates these phenomena, but because he formalizes them, makes them official, enforces their continuation. He is the administrator, who takes natural processes and turns them into cosmic law. Enki, Lord Earth or Lord Foundation. His domain is the Abzu, the subterranean ocean of fresh water that the Sumerians believed existed deep beneath the Earth's surface. The Abzu is not chaos like Namu. It is organized water, freshwater sources, springs, underground aquifers, the source of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Enki does not create the Abzu. The texts describe him as dwelling in it, organizing it, managing it. He establishes boundaries for the waters, assigns them their courses, ensures they flow where they are needed. In the myths, Enki is the god of wisdom, crafts, and technical knowledge. He is the engineer of the divine realm. When the other gods need something built or a problem solved, they turn to Enki. But his wisdom is not creative genius in the modern sense. It is organizational expertise. He knows how systems work, how to allocate resources, how to coordinate labor, how to make existing materials serve necessary functions. The myth called Enki and the World Order provides extraordinary detail. In this text, Enki travels through the known world, assigning functions to everything. He does not create the Tigris and Euphrates. They already exist. He fills them with fish, establishes their boundaries, assigns their functions in irrigating the land. He does not create grain or livestock. He assigns them to the appropriate gods to manage. He does not invent weaving or construction. He designates deities responsible for those crafts. It is pure administration, taking what exists and organizing it into a functioning system. Inanna, goddess of love, war, political power. Her Akkadian name is Ishtar. She is one of the most complex figures in the Mesopotamian pantheon, simultaneous embodiment of fertility and destruction, desire and violence, creation and chaos. But even Inanna, for all her mythological prominence, does not create her domain. She acquires it. The most famous myth involving Inanna is the theft of the me from Enki. The me, sometimes translated as divine decrees or cosmic principles, are the fundamental rules by which civilization operates. Kingship, priesthood, sexual practices, legal judgment, crafts, music, everything that makes organized society function. In the myth, Enki possesses the me. Inanna visits him. They drink together. Enki, drunk, offers her the me as gifts. She accepts and flees back to her city Uruk before he can change his mind. Enki sends servants to retrieve the me, but Inanna outwits them. She brings the me to Uruk, and thus Uruk becomes the center of civilization. But notice, the me are not created in this myth. They exist. Enki already possesses them. Inanna transfers them from one location to another, from one deity to another. This is institutional knowledge transfer, political maneuvering, the shift of administrative authority from one center of power to another. Inanna does not invent civilization. She acquires the authority to govern it. Across the pantheon, the pattern repeats. Utu, the sun god, does not create the sun. He is the sun, driving his chariot across the sky, maintaining the daily cycle that predates his naming. Nanna, the moon god, does not generate the moon. He is the moon, marking the months, governing the tides, embodying a celestial pattern older than theology. Ninhursag, the mother goddess, does not invent birth. She presides over it, assists it, ensures its continuation. The gods are not creators. They are personifications of processes already occurring. They are the divine bureaucracy, managing a cosmos already in operation. The most revealing aspect of Sumerian theology is the assembly of the gods, the divine council, the committee structure of heaven. In the myths, major decisions are not made by individual deities acting on personal whim. They are made by consensus, by debate, by the assembly voting. When the gods decide to send the flood, it is not Enlil acting alone. The assembly discusses the problem of overpopulation. They debate solutions. They vote. The decision is collective. When the gods decide to create humanity, in the myth we will examine more closely in the next chapter, it is not a single creator, God speaking the word. It is a committee addressing a labor shortage. Picture this not as a supernatural council, but as a mirror, a reflection of how post-flood administrators actually governed: city councils, assemblies of elders, collective decision-making structures. Not literally, of course, but as a projection of human institutional structures into the divine realm. When the scribes needed to legitimize collective governance, they described the gods governing collectively. When they needed to explain why certain cities held certain authorities, they told stories of gods transferring the me. The divine bureaucracy mirrors human bureaucracy. Or perhaps more accurately, the divine bureaucracy encodes human bureaucracy in a form that grants it eternal validity. If the gods rule by assembly, then human rulers can claim their assemblies reflect cosmic order. If the gods transfer authority through the me, then human transfers of power can be described as divinely ordained. The myths do not describe supernatural events. They describe institutional processes dressed in theological language. And the me, These divine decrees that govern everything are perhaps the clearest evidence of this. The me are not magical. They are rules, legal principles, social norms, technical procedures, administrative protocols, everything a complex society needs to function, everything that must be preserved when catastrophe threatens to erase institutional memory. By attributing the me to divine origin, by saying Enki possesses them and Inanna transfers them, the scribes ensure these principles will be maintained, will be treated as sacred, will be preserved across generations, even if the reasons behind them are forgotten. The gods do not create civilization, they preserve it. So the pattern clarifies. The Anunnaki are described as administrators, not makers, as inheritors of cosmic systems, not inventors. Divine bureaucracy mirrors human institutions or encodes them in eternal form. Enlil enforces laws that predate him. Enki manages waters already flowing. Inanna governs cities already built. The assembly makes collective decisions about a world already operating. But who built the institutions they administer? Who established the systems they organize? Who created the civilization they govern? The myths do not say, they open with after. They describe organization, not origin, which points us toward the answer we have been building toward from the beginning. Before the gods had names, something existed. Before writing could document it, someone built it. Before myths could explain it, human hands shaped it. The next question becomes, what did those humans achieve? What complexity existed before literacy? What knowledge did they accumulate before documentation? And why, when catastrophe disrupted transmission, did mythology become the only way to preserve what they had built? We turn now to the evidence of pre-literate sophistication, to the systems that functioned for thousands of years before anyone could write down how they worked, to the infrastructure the gods inherited, and the human knowledge that became divine wisdom when the names of the builders were lost. Chapter 5. The Pre-Literate Foundation Systems Before Stories. Two questions shape this chapter. First, what complexity existed before documentation? Second, how did knowledge survive when origins became inaccessible? From engineering to encoding, from human achievement to divine preservation. Picture southern Mesopotamia in 5000 BCE. No cities yet, but settlements growing. No writing, but complexity accumulating. No bronze, but copper being worked. No wheels, but sledges moving stone. And water, always water. The problem and the solution. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers flood unpredictably. Too much water in spring when snowmelt rushes down from the Armenian highlands. Too little in summer when crops need it most. The rivers shift course. They cut new channels. They abandon old ones. Farming in this environment requires control, channeling, storage, distribution. It requires irrigation. The earliest irrigation canals in southern Mesopotamia date to the 6th millennium BCE. Simple ditches at first, diverting water from river to field. But even simple ditches require knowledge. Where to cut the channel? At what angle? How deep? How wide? What gradient allows water to flow without eroding the banks or depositing too much silt? How to prevent flooding in one field while ensuring adequate water reaches fields downstream? This is not instinctive knowledge. This is accumulated observation, trial and error across generations, grandfathers teaching fathers, fathers teaching sons, engineers whose names we will never know, solving problems through careful attention to water behavior, soil absorption, seasonal patterns. By 4000 BCE, the canal systems had evolved into networks, multiple settlements coordinating water distribution across kilometers, shared infrastructure requiring shared maintenance, collective labor, organized scheduling. Someone had to plan this. Survey the land, calculate gradients, assign labor, settle disputes when one settlement diverted too much water, leaving downstream fields dry. Someone had to understand watershed management at a scale, requiring coordination across multiple communities, multiple generations, multiple lifetimes of accumulated expertise. And all of this happened before anyone could write down how it worked. The canals exist in the archaeological record, We can trace them, map them, measure their gradients. But the engineers who designed them left no names, no manuals, no explanations of their calculations. The knowledge was oral, transmitted through demonstration and practice. The apprentice watching the master measure with knotted rope and wooden stakes. The community gathering for collective maintenance. The old men explaining where the canal must be cleared, where the banks must be reinforced, where the flow must be redirected. Then the flood comes, and the master drowns. And the apprentice knows enough to keep the system functioning, but not enough to explain why it functions. The canal remains. The knowledge becomes partial. Eventually, someone says, Enki designed this. The god of the deep waters, the divine engineer. Not because it is literally true, but because attributing the design to a god ensures it will be maintained by generations who no longer understand the mathematics behind the gradient. The Sumerians did not invent astronomy. They inherited astronomical observation. Sky watching in Mesopotamia predates writing by thousands of years. Not mysterious lost science, not advanced alien technology, but careful observation accumulated across lifetimes. Practical knowledge gathered because survival depended on it. When to plant barley, when to expect the spring floods, when the summer heat would peak, when autumn rains might begin. The sky provided the calendar, the moon cycling 29 or 30 days, 12 lunar months making a year, though falling short of the solar year by 11 days. The priests correcting the drift by adding intercalary months. When the seasons began to slip, certain stars rose at certain times. Marked planting seasons, harvest seasons, flood seasons. Temple orientations reflect this knowledge. The corners of major structures align to celestial events. Not perfectly. The technology was limited, but deliberately, intentionally. Someone observed the rising sun at solstice, marked the angle, designed the temple platform to acknowledge it. This knowledge was transmitted orally. The old priest teaching the young one when to watch for the heliacal rising of certain stars, which lunar phase meant the river would soon begin to rise, which constellations marked the approach of summer heat. Generation after generation, century after century, the knowledge growing more precise through accumulated observation. Then catastrophe disrupts the chain. The priest who held the calculations drowns. His student knows the festivals, but not the astronomical principles behind them. The calendar continues because the patterns are observable. The moon still cycles. The stars still rise. But the understanding of why these specific dates matter, what celestial geometry they mark, what deeper significance they hold, that understanding has gaps. Eventually, the gaps become chasms. The gods must have ordained these dates. The celestial deities who understand the heavens, divine wisdom rather than human observation. The function survives. The origin becomes divine. The great ziggurats that dominate the landscape of later Mesopotamian cities did not appear suddenly. They evolved. Temple platforms in the 6th millennium BCE were simple, raised foundations keeping sacred spaces above flood level. Practical engineering. Protect the shrine. Protect the offerings. Protect the priesthood quarters. But over time, the platforms grew, each generation rebuilding higher than the last, adding layers, increasing elevation. By the late 4th millennium, some platforms reached 20 meters high, massive constructions requiring sophisticated understanding of load, bearing principles, material properties, construction sequencing. Consider what building a 20-meter mud brick platform requires. Millions of bricks. Each brick must be standardized. Same size, same shape, same composition, or the structure will be unstable. Someone had to establish brick molds, ensure quality control across thousands of workers making millions of bricks. The foundation must be solid, the lower layers bearing the weight of everything above. Someone had to understand soil compaction, foundation preparation, the danger of building on soft ground. The structure must be stepped or sloped to prevent collapse. Someone had to calculate angles, determine setbacks, design stability into the form itself. The construction must happen in phases. You cannot build 20 meters of wet mud brick at once. It would collapse under its own weight before drying. Someone had to sequence the work, Let each layer cure before adding the next. Coordinate labor across years, decades, generations. And all this knowledge, standardization, structural engineering, project management across multi-generational timescales, existed before writing. It was transmitted through practice. Master builders training apprentices. Guilds maintaining standards. Communities coordinating labor according to principles learned from ancestors, who learned from their ancestors. The structures remain. We excavate them, marvel at them. But the architects left no names. The engineers left no blueprints. The project managers left no schedules. When writing finally emerges and scribes begin to explain these monuments, they describe them as divinely ordained, built according to plans given by the gods, sacred geometry from heaven. Not because gods literally provided blueprints, but because the human knowledge that built them had become inaccessible, too distant, too complex, beyond the ability of post-catastrophe scribes to attribute to mortal hands. The achievement was too great to be human, so it became divine. So we see sophisticated systems developing over millennia, all before documentation. Canal networks requiring watershed management, astronomical observations guiding agricultural calendars, architectural achievements demanding multi-generational coordination, knowledge carried only in oral tradition, transmitted through demonstration, preserved through practice. But knowledge carried this way faces a fundamental vulnerability. When catastrophe disrupts transmission, when elders die before teaching apprentices, when populations disperse and communities fracture, function might survive, but explanation does not, which is where mythology enters. Not as fantasy, but as preservation mechanism. There is a specific process by which human knowledge becomes divine mythology. It is not mysterious. It is practical. And it happens across cultures whenever catastrophe disrupts institutional continuity. The process works like this. A technique or system is developed by human hands. Engineers design canals. Astronomers track celestial cycles. Architects develop construction methods. Administrators create governance structures. This knowledge is transmitted orally, practically, through demonstration and apprenticeship. Catastrophe disrupts the chain of transmission. Flood, war, plague, famine. The masters die before the apprentices are fully trained. Populations disperse. Communities fragment. The institutional framework that preserved and transmitted knowledge fractures. The systems themselves often survive. The canals still channel water. The calendar still marks seasons. The buildings still stand. The governance structures still function. Because these things are physical, observable. Their continued existence does not require understanding their origin. But when the next generation asks who built this, or why does it work this way, the answer is lost. The chain is broken. The attribution is impossible. So the answer becomes the gods, divine wisdom, sacred knowledge, heavenly gift, not through deception, not through ignorance, but through necessity. Because if you cannot remember who built the canal, but you know the canal is essential, you must ensure it will be maintained. And the most effective way to ensure maintenance is to declare it sacred, to say a god built it, to make it taboo to alter or neglect. The mythology preserves function when documentation fails. In Sumer, we can trace this pattern exactly. Irrigation techniques become Enki's wisdom. Why does this canal angle precisely 12 degrees? Because Enki, lord of the deep waters, divine engineer, ordained it. The function is preserved. The reasoning is lost, but the preservation works. Metallurgy becomes gifts of divine crafts. Why do you mix tin with copper in these proportions to make bronze? Because the gods taught the ancestors. The ratio is preserved as sacred knowledge. The experimentation that discovered it, generations of smiths testing combinations, is forgotten. Astronomical observations become the celestial gods' knowledge. Why do we celebrate the festival on this specific day? Because the gods decreed it. The observation that the Pleiades rise at dawn on this date, marking the season that is preserved. The centuries of watching required to establish the pattern, forgotten. Medical knowledge becomes Ninisina's healing. Why does this herb treat fever? The goddess of healing provided it. The plant's properties are preserved as sacred medicine. The process of discovery, generations testing plants, observing effects, transmitting successful treatments, vanishes into divine origin. The pattern is universal. Technical knowledge transforms into divine gift. Social institutions transform into divine decree. Practical wisdom transforms into sacred law. Not because the gods are real in a supernatural sense, but because mythology is the most effective preservation technology available to pre-literate or post-catastrophe societies. Attributing essential knowledge to divine origin serves multiple functions. First, it ensures preservation. If a canal is sacred to Enki, it will be maintained even by generations who do not understand hydraulic engineering. Religious obligation replaces technical understanding as motivation for maintenance. Second, it prevents harmful alterations. If the harvest festival date is divinely ordained, no ambitious administrator can change it for convenience. The astronomical observation it preserves remains fixed. Even when no one remembers it, is an astronomical observation. Third, it legitimizes authority. If the king rules by divine mandate, if kingship descended from heaven, his authority is unquestionable. The governance structure is preserved across political transitions because it is rendered eternal through divine association. Fourth, it creates stability through crisis. When flood or war or famine disrupts everything else, the myths persist. They can be memorized, recited, transmitted orally, even when libraries burn and archives dissolve. The gods become a cultural hard drive, a backup system for institutional knowledge. Imperfect, the details are lost, the reasoning becomes obscure, but functional. The essential elements survive. Consider the alternative. Without divine attribution, without mythology, a post-catastrophe society faces the monumental task of re-explaining everything from first principles. Why this canal angle? Experiment until you rediscover the right gradient. How many failed crops before you learn? Why this planting date? Observe the sky for how many years before you establish the pattern? Or you can say, the gods ordained it. Trust the inherited practice. Maintain the system even without understanding it. And society continues functioning while knowledge slowly accumulates again. This is not primitive superstition. This is sophisticated cultural technology. It is how complex societies preserve complexity through discontinuity. The Sumerians were not unique in developing this technology, but they were remarkably honest about it. Their myths consistently frame the gods as organizers of what already exists, rather than creators of something new. Their language emphasizes inheritance, from days of old, rather than innovation. It is as if the scribes understood, at some level, that they were encoding rather than inventing, preserving rather than creating, writing down in mythological form what had been practiced before anyone could write. Most cultures mythologize their origins, but most cultures claim their gods created everything from nothing. Divine generation, supernatural making. The world begins when the gods speak, or reproduce, or sacrifice, or dream. The Sumerians are different. Their gods organize. They separate. They assign. They administer. But they do not create the fundamental structures of reality. Heaven and earth emerge from Namu before the gods are born. The rivers flow before Enki manages them. The cities stand before Inanna rules them. Grain grows before the grain goddess is named. This suggests something profound. The Sumerian scribes knew they were latecomers. They admitted it explicitly in their texts. After kingship descended, from days of old, before the flood. They were not inventing theology to explain natural phenomena they could not understand. They were encoding in theological form the institutional knowledge they had inherited but could no longer trace to human origin. They stood in cities they did not build. They maintained systems they did not design. They practiced techniques they did not invent. And they created gods to explain the gap between their own time and the time when these things were made. The gods are not fantasies. They are translations. Attempts to render lost human history into a form that can be transmitted, remembered, used to legitimize and preserve the present order. This is why Sumerian mythology feels different from other mythologies. There is less cosmic drama, less creation from nothing, less divine violence generating the world, more administration, more organization, more inheritance. because the Sumerians were not explaining how the world began. They were explaining how they received it. Picture a scribe in Nippur, 2,400 years before our era. He is composing a hymn to Enki, the god of wisdom, the divine engineer. The scribe lives in a city whose canals have flowed for 3,000 years, whose temple platform has been rebuilt 18 times, whose social hierarchy stretches back beyond memory. He knows the canals work. He knows the temple is sacred. He knows the kings rule by authority that feels eternal. But he does not know who dug the first canal, who laid the first brick, who established the principle that kings rule cities. So he writes, Enki did it. Enki the wise. Enki, who dwells in the Abzu. Enki, who organizes the waters and establishes the land. He is not lying. He is preserving, taking knowledge too ancient to attribute and encoding it in divine form so it will survive another 1,000 years. The god becomes the vessel. The myth becomes the hard drive. Function preserved when origin is lost. Now we can see the mechanism complete. Systems built over millennia. Catastrophe disrupts transmission. Writing emerges to manage what survived. Gods created to encode what could not be documented. Not fantasy. Not aliens. But a solution to the most human of problems. How to preserve what we have built when we have forgotten how we built it. Irrigation becomes Enki's wisdom. Astronomy becomes celestial knowledge. Architecture becomes divine blueprint. Governance becomes heavenly mandate. The gods remember what humans forgot, not because gods are supernatural, but because mythology is how we remember when documentation fails. Which brings us back to the question that opened this journey. What existed before the Anunnaki came to Earth? We have the evidence now. The language pointing to inheritance. The archaeology showing cities older than myths. The flood marking memory rupture. The gods described as administrators. The systems functioning before literacy. All the pieces converge toward a single answer. Not ancient aliens. Not supernatural intervention. But something equally profound and more fundamentally human. We turn now to the synthesis. To stating clearly what the tablets actually reveal. To answering the question with evidence rather than speculation. To the moment when everything we have built collapses into a single, unavoidable conclusion. What the Sumerians knew. What they wrote. What they preserved in the honest word after. Chapter 6. What the tablets actually reveal. Not speculation. Not ancient alien theories. But what converging evidence from language, archaeology, and comparative mythology actually reveals. The answer has been building from the first word. After. The oldest written language on Earth does not describe creation. It describes reception. After kingship descended from heaven. Not when. Not as. But after. After something already existed. After a sequence already underway. After events the text does not name, because perhaps the scribes themselves did not know. Ad. Yul. Du. A. From days of old. The phrase appears across hundreds of texts spanning more than 1,000 years. Temple dedications. Royal inscriptions. Mythological prologues. Consistently framing the present as restoration. Renewal. Return to what ancestors built. When Ur-Nammu rebuilds the ziggurat, he does not claim innovation. He restores what had fallen into ruin from days of old. When Gudea constructs temples, he follows ancient plans. When Gilgamesh is praised, it is for bringing back knowledge from before the flood. The language is obsessed with what came before, with precedent, with antiquity, with the lost knowledge of ancestors whose achievements seem impossible to replicate. This is not the language of a civilization that believes it is first. This is the language of a civilization that believes it came late, that inherited rather than invented, that maintains rather than creates. The Sumerians told us this directly. They wrote it in their most sacred political documents. They encoded it in their religious texts. They repeated it across genres and centuries. After. From days of old. Restoring what ancestors built. Bringing back knowledge from before. They knew they were not the origin. They admitted it explicitly. The question is whether we believe them. The cities the myths describe are real places, and when we excavate them, they tell a story the myths cannot erase. Eridu. Continuous occupation from approximately 7500 BCE, simple shrines evolving into elaborate temples, 18 rebuilding phases on the same sacred spot, each generation constructing directly above the ruins of the previous generation, continuity across 3,000 years before writing even begins. Uruk, platform structures built in layers, earlier buildings deliberately filled in to create elevation for later buildings. Multi-generational engineering projects, gradual sophistication, no rupture event, no moment when the gods descended and cities appeared. Tel Bruk, the Eye Temple sitting on occupation levels stretching back into the 5th millennium. Pottery sequences showing stylistic evolution, trade goods from Afghanistan. Administrative tokens used for accounting before numerical systems existed. The pattern is consistent across southern Mesopotamia. Cities do not appear suddenly. They grow. Settlement becomes village. Village becomes town. Town becomes city. Incrementally, across millennia, through continuous human habitation and labor, no divine intervention moment visible in the stratigraphy, no layer that says here the gods arrived. Just slow accumulation of complexity, brick by brick, generation by generation. Human hands shaping mud into civilization. By the time writing emerges to document these cities, they are already 2,000 years old. By the time myths are composed to explain them, they are ancient even to the scribes writing the myths. The gods did not found these cities. The cities predated the gods. Archaeological evidence proves it. Occupation layers do not lie. The flood deposits are real. Sterile clay interrupting occupation sequences. At 8 feet of it. At Shurapak, significant silt layers, regional flooding across different periods, different locations, different depths. Not a single world, ending deluge, but multiple flooding events across centuries. The kind of disasters that displace populations, damage infrastructure, disrupt institutional continuity. The Sumerian King List explicitly marks the flood as a break. Before the flood, one set of kings. After the flood, kingship descends again, but in a different city. The genealogy ruptures. The sequence restarts. The myths describe this moment with remarkable clarity. The olden days have turned to clay. The organized world returning to formless mud. Not total destruction, cities rebuild, but transformation, loss. The gap between what existed and what can be remembered. This is the critical insight. The flood does not destroy everything, but it destroys records. Documentation, the ability to trace who built what and why it works. Survivors inherit infrastructure without instruction manuals. They maintain systems without understanding origin. Function continues. Explanation becomes inaccessible. And into that gap, that space between inherited complexity and lost attribution, mythology enters. Not as fantasy, but as preservation technology. The gods become the answer to questions that can no longer be answered with human names. This represents one interpretation of converging evidence. Not the only interpretation. Not definitive proof. But a reading supported by archaeological stratigraphy, textual analysis, and comparative study of how post-catastrophe societies encode knowledge. 7,000 to 5,000 BCE. Settlement patterns established across southern Mesopotamia. Communities learning to manage the unpredictable flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates. Early irrigation ditches. Agricultural surplus allowing population growth. Villages forming. Simple shrines marking sacred spaces. Knowledge transmitted orally. Techniques passed from generation to generation. How to channel water. When to plant. Which soils hold moisture. Where floods will reach. 5,000 to 4,000 BCE. Villages evolving into proto-urban centers. Eridu's temple platforms rising. Specialized labor emerging potters, metalworkers, priests. Long-distance trade networks forming. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan appearing in southern Mesopotamian sites. Irrigation systems becoming more sophisticated. Multiple settlements coordinating water distribution. Shared infrastructure requiring shared maintenance and collective decision-making. Astronomical observations accumulating. Skywatchers noting patterns. Lunar cycles. Stellar risings. Seasonal markers for planting and harvest. 4000 to 3500 BCE. Full urbanization. Uruk becoming a city. Monumental architecture. Temple platforms reaching heights requiring advanced engineering knowledge. Brick standardization. Load-bearing principles. Multi-generational construction projects. Social stratification. Hierarchies forming. Administrators managing surpluses. Accounting systems developing. Clay tokens representing goods, quantities, transactions. All of this before writing, before documentation, knowledge carried in human memory and practice. Approximately 3500 to 3000 BCE. Regional flooding events. Multiple occurrences across different periods. Archaeological deposits mark disruption. Some settlements abandoned temporarily, others damaged but rebuilt. Population displacement. Institutional continuity stressed. The chain of transmission master to apprentice, elder to youth fractured in places. Knowledge becomes partial. Attribution becomes uncertain. 3200 BCE. Writing emerges. Not for literature, but for administration. Managing the complexity of urban life. Recording grain distributions. Tracking labor obligations. Accounting for goods moving through systems already operating. The first texts are inventories. Ration lists. Tallies of livestock, grain, beer. The systems they document are ancient. The writing is new. 2600 BCE onward. Literacy expands to include narrative. Scribes begin composing myths. Hymns, royal inscriptions, epic literature. Attempts to explain a world older than explanation. The texts describe gods organizing the cosmos. Kingship descending from heaven. Divine wisdom establishing civilization. Not because this is literally true, but because this is how post-catastrophe scribes encode pre-catastrophe knowledge. When the chain of human attribution has been severed, the gods become the vessel. Mythology becomes the preservation technology. The Anunnaki appear as administrators of inherited systems, not creators, organizers, managers of what already existed. This timeline is one possible reading. Scholars debate details. Dates shift as new evidence emerges. Interpretations vary across different theoretical frameworks, but the pattern holds. Cities developing over millennia before writing. Systems functioning before documentation. Knowledge transmitted orally. Catastrophe, disrupting continuity. Mythology emerging to preserve what documentation cannot. The tablets do not prove ancient aliens. They reveal ancient humans building, forgetting, remembering through mythology. What existed before the Anunnaki came to Earth? Human beings. Not extraterrestrials descending from Nibiru. Not supernatural entities materializing from cosmic void, but communities of human beings building civilization over thousands of years, engineers solving practical problems, astronomers tracking celestial patterns, architects developing construction techniques, administrators coordinating labor across settlements and generations, all before anyone could write it down. Imagine the achievement clearly, starting with nothing but seasonal flooding and alluvial soil, learning through generations of observation where water flows, how soil drains, when floods arrive, developing irrigation techniques that allow agriculture, creating surplus that frees some people from constant food production to specialize in crafts, administration, priesthood, building villages that become towns that become cities, constructing platforms that keep sacred spaces above flood level, rebuilding those platforms higher with each generation until they become massive ziggurats visible for miles across flat landscape, establishing trade networks that bring lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, timber from Lebanon, copper from Anatolia, coordinating labor across multiple settlements for projects too large for single communities, creating administrative systems to manage resources, distribute rations, track obligations, watching the sky for decades, then centuries, then millennia, noting when stars rise, when the moon cycles, when seasons shift, building knowledge of celestial patterns precise enough to create calendars, time festivals, orient temples to solstice sunrise. All of this is human achievement. Extraordinary human achievement. The product of countless individuals whose names we will never know, contributing incremental knowledge across time spans, longer than any individual lifetime. Then, catastrophe. Not complete destruction, but disruption, flooding, population displacement, institutional frameworks stressed or broken, the masters who held the most complete knowledge dying before apprentices were fully trained. Records, such as they were in oral tradition, lost or corrupted. When stability returns, the survivors inherit. The cities still stand. The canals still channel water. The temples still mark sacred space. The social hierarchies still function. But the knowledge of who built them, why they were built this way, what principles governed their design, that knowledge exists now only partially. Fragmented. Uncertain. Writing emerges in this world, not to record creation but to manage inheritance. The first tablets list what exists: grain in storage, land allocated, labor assigned, systems already operating, now documented. When literacy expands to narrative, the scribes face their impossible task: explain origins that predate memory, account for achievements that seem superhuman, connect present institutions to foundations beyond documentation. So they create the Anunnaki, divine figures representing the organizing principles they observe but cannot trace to human hands. Gods who embody the functions that sustain Sumerian life, but whose creation myths are conspicuously absent. Enlil does not create the separation of heaven and earth, he enforces it. Enki does not generate freshwater sources, he manages them. Inanna does not invent cities, she governs them. The gods administer what already existed. The Anunnaki are not aliens, they are metaphors. Metaphors for human achievements so ancient that even the ancients could not remember who achieved them. This is what the tablets reveal. Not supernatural intervention, not extraterrestrial engineering, but human brilliance building across millennia, catastrophe severing attribution, mythology preserving function when origin becomes inaccessible. The gods remember what humans forgot, not because gods exist as literal beings, but because when institutional knowledge drowns in floodwater, when technical expertise dies with unnamed engineers, when only the phrase "this is sacred to Enki" survives, that phrase becomes the carrier, function preserved, origin lost. The god becomes the vessel, the myth becomes the memory. The most profound mystery is not whether aliens visited Earth, it is how much of our own human past we have already forgotten, how many achievements we can no longer attribute, how many techniques we maintain without understanding. The Sumerians stood in this mystery. They wrote from within it. They encoded it honestly with the word after. After what? After achievements too distant to name. After builders too ancient to remember. After a world that constructed itself so well, even its constructors became myths. This interpretation aligns with how civilizations across history mythologize distant achievements when catastrophe disrupts transmission. Medieval Europeans attributed Roman engineering to giants. Mongol scholars attributed lost mathematical knowledge to legendary sages. Colonial interruptions transformed indigenous technical knowledge into divine gifts from culture heroes. The pattern is not unique to Mesopotamia. It is a human response to a universal problem. When you inherit complexity you cannot explain, you attribute it to forces greater than human, to ancestors who were superhuman, to gods who gifted knowledge from beyond. The Sumerians were not unique in this response. They were unique in being honest about it, in admitting they came late, in writing after. And this reveals something profound, not about gods, but about us, about memory, about civilization itself, about what happens when the thread of continuity breaks and we must rebuild understanding from fragments. The Sumerians faced this. They solved it through mythology, through encoding essential knowledge in divine form so it would survive when human attribution failed. We face it too. Every time institutional knowledge is lost, every time expertise dies without transmission, every time we maintain systems we barely understand, the mirror they hold up reflects our own fragility, our own dependence on continuity, our own vulnerability to forgetting. Closing. The mirror we hold. 3 reflections before we return. First, what our future might reveal. Then, what history's pattern teaches. Finally, what it means to open your eyes. Imagine, not as fear, but as contemplation. Our world faces disruption, not total collapse, but enough. Climate shifts, bringing floods to coastal cities. Rising waters claiming infrastructure built over centuries. Digital systems corrupted. Server farms underwater. The cloud inaccessible. Hard drives degrading. The knowledge stored in formats already becoming obsolete. Populations displaced. Not everyone dies. Communities survive. But institutional continuity fractures. Universities flooded. Libraries damaged. The experts who held the most complete knowledge scattered. The apprentices who were still learning left incomplete. 1,000 years later, the survivors have rebuilt. Cities function again. Not the same cities, but cities. Infrastructure operates. Not the original infrastructure, but systems that work. Agriculture feeds populations. Not with our techniques, but with techniques that suffice. And they stand before our ruins. Highways whose engineers left no blueprints. The design knowledge encoded in computer files they cannot read. The concrete formulas optimized through decades of testing, lost. But the highways remain, still spanning rivers, still connecting cities, still functional if you maintain them. Power grids that delivered electricity across continents. The load distribution algorithms that prevented cascading failures, incomprehensible now. The engineering principles that balance generation and consumption across time zones, forgotten. But the transmission towers stand. The cables still run underground. The basic function observable even if the sophisticated control is lost. Water treatment plants that turned rivers into drinking water. The chemical processes precisely calibrated. The bacterial filtration carefully balanced. The monitoring systems that detected contamination before it spread, all beyond recovery. But the plants still exist. The basic structure visible. The function obvious even if the technical understanding is gone. And they ask, who built this? How did they know to place the highway here, with this curve, at this grade? Why do the power lines follow this specific route? What wisdom allowed them to purify water on such a scale? They have no answers. The documentation is lost. The experts are dead. The chain of transmission broken. So they create gods. The gods who gave the gift of the great roads. The celestial deities who understood the mysterious force of electricity. The divine purifiers who blessed the waters, not because they are primitive, not because they are superstitious, but because they are practical, because attributing these systems to divine origin ensures they will be maintained, treated as sacred, preserved, even by generations who no longer understand the engineering. Would they be wrong to do this? Or would they be doing exactly what the Sumerians did? Preserving function when origin becomes inaccessible. Creating mythology as a cultural technology for transmitting essential knowledge across the gap of catastrophe. They would call us the Anunnaki, the ancient ones who descended from a golden age to organize the world, the builders whose achievements seemed superhuman, the engineers who must have possessed divine wisdom because mortal humans could not have calculated such precision. And in their bewilderment, in their mythology, in their honest admission that they came after, they would be preserving our memory. Imperfectly, symbolically, but preserving it nonetheless. Just as the Sumerians preserved the memory of those who came before them. This pattern repeats throughout history. Rome falls. The aqueducts remain. Medieval Europeans cannot replicate the engineering, cannot understand how water flows uphill through siphons, cannot fathom the surveying precision required to maintain gradient across miles of landscape. So they create legends. Giants built these structures, or ancient wizards, or races of superhuman builders from before the flood. The function is preserved. Some aqueducts continue operating into the medieval period, but the engineering knowledge is lost. Mythology fills the gap. The Mongol invasions sweep through Baghdad. The House of Wisdom burns. Centuries of astronomical observation, mathematical treatises, medical texts, gone. Later generations preserve fragments, but the chain of transmission is broken. The accumulated knowledge becomes attributed to legendary wise men, blessed by divine inspiration. How did Al-Khwarizmi know algebra? How did Al-Battani calculate celestial positions with such accuracy? The technical training, the institutional knowledge, The generations of teachers and students building on each other's work, this context is lost. What remains becomes the achievement of individual geniuses touched by God. Colonial powers disrupt indigenous knowledge systems across the Americas. Oral traditions that carried sophisticated agricultural techniques, astronomical observations, medicinal practices across generations, interrupted. Elders die before teaching. Communities disperse. Languages suppressed. What survives often becomes encoded in mythology. Sacred stories. Divine gifts from culture heroes. Quetzalcoatl bringing maize. Viracocha teaching agriculture. Not because gods literally taught these things, but because when you can no longer trace the human chain of discovery and refinement, divine attribution becomes the mechanism that preserves the practice. The pattern is universal. Catastrophe disrupts transmission. Knowledge becomes partial. Attribution becomes divine. Mythology preserves function. And we face it now. Our own digital dark age looming. How much of our knowledge exists only in formats that require software no longer maintained? How much expertise resides in the minds of aging specialists who have not fully trained the next generation? How many systems do we already maintain without complete understanding of their design principles? When the cloud fails, when the servers flood, when the file formats become unreadable, what will survive? What will future generations attribute to us? What stories will they tell to preserve what we built when they can no longer explain how we built it? Civilization is fragile. Not in its ability to rebuild, humans are extraordinary at rebuilding, but in its memory, technical knowledge, institutional wisdom, the reasons why systems work, these vanish faster than the systems themselves. Documentation matters. But when documentation fails, mythology preserves. Imperfectly. Symbolically. But it preserves. And that is why the Sumerian word after is the most honest line in all of human history. Not in the beginning. Not the gods created. But after. After something we cannot name. After someone we cannot remember. After a world that built so well, even its builders became myths. That single word, after, admits the gap, honors the unknown, preserves the inheritance without claiming to understand the origin. It is the most profound form of honesty, admitting you are late to a story that began long before you arrived. The Sumerians knew they were not first. They wrote it explicitly. They encoded it in their most sacred texts. They admitted they stood in ruins they did not build, maintained systems they did not design, practiced techniques they did not invent. And in that honesty, in that humble admission of coming after, they preserved more truth than all the creation myths that claim divine genesis from nothing. The tablets do not reveal ancient aliens. They reveal ancient humans. Humans who built systems so sophisticated their own descendants could not fathom human hands alone achieving them. And in their bewilderment, those descendants created gods. This is not about debunking myths. It is about understanding what myths do. They carry knowledge forward when documentation fails. They preserve institutional memory in forms that survive catastrophe. They encode wisdom that oral tradition can transmit across generations who have lost the ability to read. The Anunnaki served that function for Sumer. Every civilization creates its own version, its own way of saying, something came before us, something greater than we can fully explain, and we are its inheritors. Our myths, scientific, religious, cultural, serve the same function for us. When we cannot trace the full chain of discovery, we tell stories about geniuses who revolutionized fields overnight, about inventors who changed the world through individual brilliance. We create culture heroes who embody accumulated knowledge we can no longer attribute to the thousands of unnamed contributors. This is not primitive thinking dressed in modern clothes. It is the same preservation technology, the same human response to the same problem. How to maintain complexity when the chain of attribution breaks. As you open your eyes now, returning to your room, to the soft glow of screens, and the familiar modern world, carry this understanding with you. Somewhere in museum basements, on clay tablets pressed in mud 6,000 years ago, there is a story, not about gods descending from heaven to create humanity, but about humans building, forgetting, remembering through mythology. The Sumerians stood among canals they did not dig, temples they did not design, systems they did not invent. They asked, who made this? And when they could not find the answer in human memory, they wrote, after. After kingship descended, after something we inherit but cannot trace. We stand in our own complexity and ask the same questions. Where did this system come from? Who designed this institution? How do we maintain what we barely understand? Perhaps, someday, our descendants will stand in our infrastructure and create their own myths to preserve what we built. Perhaps they too will be honest enough to write, after. After the ancient ones who understood electricity, after the builders who could shape metal and glass into machines that think, after a civilization that reached for the stars before the waters rose, they will not be wrong to mythologize us. They will be preserving our achievements the only way post-catastrophe societies can, through stories that survive when servers do not, through myths that can be memorized when hard drives corrode. The gods remember what humans forgot, not because gods exist supernaturally, but because mythology is how we remember when all other forms of memory fail. The Anunnaki are not aliens from distant planets. They are ancestors from a time so deep, even time itself forgot them. And in recognizing that, in seeing the humanity beneath the divine names, we honor both the builders we cannot name and the scribes who preserved their memory the only way they could. Through myth, through mystery, through the honest word, after. After achievements too distant to name, after builders too ancient to remember, after a world that constructed so well, its constructors became gods. This is not a failure of memory. It is a triumph of preservation. The knowledge survived. The systems continued. The inheritance passed forward even when the chain of attribution broke. The Sumerians succeeded. They preserved what mattered, not the names of individual engineers, but the functions those engineers created, not the faces of architects, but the buildings they designed, not the identities of administrators, but the institutions they established. They succeeded because they were honest, because they wrote after, because they admitted they were late, because they encoded what they knew in forms that would survive what they did not know. And we can learn from that honesty, from that humility, from that practical wisdom that preservation matters more than attribution, that function matters more than origin, that passing knowledge forward matters more than claiming credit for where it came from. The tablets reveal our reflection. We are the Sumerians, standing in complexity we did not create, maintaining systems we barely understand, inheriting achievements from ancestors whose names we do not know, and like them, we must choose. Do we pretend we are the beginning? Do we claim our civilization arose from nothing through our own genius? Or do we admit we are late, that we stand on foundations built by countless hands across countless generations? The honest answer is after. We come after. We inherit. We preserve. We pass forward. And in that honesty lies our best hope of ensuring that when catastrophe comes, as it always does, something of what we built will survive. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough for those who come after us to remember that we were here, that we built, that we tried to pass forward what we received, just as the Sumerians passed forward to us. Thank you for this journey through ancient silences and forgotten foundations. If this shifted how you see our own fragility and resilience, share it with someone who values deep questions. Like if it resonated, subscribe for more explorations of what lies beneath ancient texts and modern assumptions. Tell me in the comments, what do you think existed before? What knowledge might we be losing even now? What will our descendants mythologize about us? Sleep well. Dream of ancient cities, of humans building across generations, of knowledge preserved in unexpected forms. Until we meet again in these spaces between history and mystery, between what we know and what we have forgotten we once knew. Good night.